Now, please give a warm round of applause for Olivier Babeau, economist and president of Institut Sapiens, who will present to us a new era of leisure and its many opportunities for the hospitality sector.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your invitation. We were about to ask ChatGPT to do everything here during this conference, but I'm going to do it still in person for a few more years. Now, I have only 24.48 minutes left. That's not good. I have a lot to say, and he's apologizing to the interpreters because he's going to speak very fast. I'd like to say a few things to you. I've come to speak about the challenges of leisure in this era of technology and machines. And I'm going to take some hindsight. Maybe you've read La Chartreuse de Parme, written by Stendhal, and the only person who doesn't understand anything about Waterloo is Fabrice Del Dongo. And you have to always take some hindsight to be happy to be living in the 20th century, because when you look at the plague in 48, in those days, in the 14th century, 40% of Europe, the people died. In Florence, it was 80%. In the country, they would say you need 2 children. Take Jean-Sébastien Bach. He saw his 2 parents die before the age of 10. He was brought up by his grandfather. His first wife died, and 10 of his 20 children died. And in 18th century, it's banal, it's normal, it's not an unfortunate life. So you should be happy living in the 21st century. Since 1960, the proportion of the humanity living in extreme poverty went from 50% to minus 10%. The reality in this world of exchange and opening, since the 30 glorious, it was a huge global enrichment. Of course, we didn't feel that in the countries that were already developed. The other things we can be happy about is the doubling of the life expectancy. Since the beginning of the 20th century and today, life expectancy has doubled. In the 18th century, life expectancy at birth was 25 years because 1 out of 2 children would die. One of my children had peritonitis at the age of 1.5. Do you know the rate of survival before 1981? 0. Appendicitis, peritonitis, you would die in extreme suffering. It's wonderful to live today, but you see, there are some objective elements to be happy about what's happening today. And if you ask people, do you think that the world is becoming a better place? Is the world improving? In China, they're quite optimistic. They're going to say, yes, at 41%. In France, it's often at the bottom of the classification for certain things. And more recently, we asked, do you think that in the next 5 years, you and your family, you would live in better conditions? And 48% of the Americans say yes, and in France, we are less than 20%. The French are maybe a bit depressed, but you see, they've answered quite well. Now, how come in a world where life is easier than in the past, well, how come we're more pessimistic? We're a bit depressed. We don't have a positive vision of the future. In the 19th century, here in Paris, in 1900, the major attraction, the major highlight in the Universal Exhibition was the Palais de l'Université. People would go to see this. It was for the first time they had this lighting at nighttime, and this whole Universal Exhibition, this fair, this was extraordinarily optimistic for the future. People were very positive. That was the positivism of Auguste Comte. We all thought that science would solve all the problems, and 20th century was beginning with an incredible optimism. There was the Rue de l'Avenir. It was a rolling carpet around the entire exhibition, and it was this idea of future is going to be beautiful, all kinds of good things were going to happen, and it would be extraordinary. But from April 2012, we thought, well, maybe science would not solve all the problems. Maybe nature would take over. And from science, we could have some misfortune. And from 1914, we understood that technology wouldn't shorten wars, but there would be a lot more people dying. And the whole 20th century, as Osgon, the historian, said, it will be the century of the extremes, a century where we tested all the extremes in terms of politics and technology, and terrifying century in terms of progress. It was the century of disillusion. And in the 21st century, it's a total change in the decor. Here we have an exponential curve, and this is just the beginning. And if you've done some mathematics, the exponential, there's a secondary derivative. You have the slope of the curve, which gives you the speed, and the secondary derivative is the acceleration of the speed. It's going faster and faster, and that's a problem of our times. That is, we have trouble understanding a world that is going faster and faster. To understand how come we're in this exponential curve, and it's not just a figure of style, let's take some more hindsight once again. If you go to Los Angeles, there's a park called Six Flags, and that's where you have all the most violent attractions. I hate that, but my wife loves it. And then you have Superman. This is one attraction, and it is us. This is this horrible attraction called Superman, and you can really get a heart attack on it, so I don't advise it. The universe, 13.5 billion of years. The Earth, 14.5. Earth arrived quickly. Our common ancestors with chimpanzees, 9 million of years. The first hominids, 2 million of years. The Stone Age lasted 3.3 million of years. For 3.3 million of years, we use the same tools. Now let's continue. If you're not specialist on painting, well, you can see it here, rock painting. You see a hunter picker, and you bring him in another century. 20,000 years between the two, Chauvet and Lascaux. For 20,000 years, the hunter lived in the same world. The reality, the existence of humanity, for 99% of the time, it was this extraordinary stability. You would die in a world where your parents were born, and that was for several generations. The Bronze Age, between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, there was only 2,000 years. And here again, you see there was an acceleration. And so here, this is a specialist of Egyptian art. You think it's the same thing. The profile face, the profile feet, the body which is in front. So you have the different temples, and here the difference between the two is 3,100 years. This is the Egyptian civilization, which is characterized by an incredible stability. It is as if we had the same representation, the same structures, the same religion as 1,000 years before Jesus Christ. Nothing has changed. And from the last moment was the Roman occupation. So let's continue. And now, this is not a torture room. It's an operation theater in 1900. It's not like what it looks like today. And everything is going faster. Between the first flight of the Wright brothers and the moment when we walked on the moon, 66 years went by. It's just a wink, 66 years. It's absolutely nothing. Look how fast it's going. 35 years between the two computers, the same thing roughly between these two phones. And what's most extraordinary is the growth in the IT capacity. In our pockets, we have several terabytes. That's not a problem. But what's most extraordinary is the capacity of computational work. The first computer would do one operation per second, and the best computer in the world, the IT power was multiplied by 1 billion, 2 billion, because the best computer in the world today, which is the Frontier, which is an American computer, it has 1 hexaflop, 1,000 petaflop, 1 billion, 2 billion operations per second. I'm sorry for the interpreters, he's going at top speed. Hexaflop is a hexaflop. So that's just the beginning, because you know that Google recently announced that he can use a quantum microprocessor 3.20 seconds to do what other computers do in 10,000 years. So 10,000 years, 20 seconds. You see the exponential curve. So that's where we stand right now. And of course, in front of the machine, there's us. Kasparov in 96 was beaten by Deep Blue. We thought it would take a lot more time to beat the best in the world. It's not much by 8, it's much greater. So for the Go game, it's not the same technique, but with deep learning, with the neural network, we could beat the best in the world. 5-1 in 2016, and Lee Sedol, the South Korean, said, well, at some moments I thought I was playing against God. But the story doesn't stop there, because a year later, the AlphaZero program we just gave it the rules of the Go game. Opposed to AlphaGo, the first program, he won 100 games against zero. 100 games against zero a year later. When it is 100-0, there's no more match, game over. And what's extraordinary is what happened most recently. If I'd done this conference 9 months ago, I would have said, well, in terms of artificial intelligence, we'd reached standstill. But no, the exponential is going up again in an extraordinary way, because the generative AI, and we talked about GPT, is not just text to text, it's text to picture and text to motion. So look at this picture. The person does not exist. I do not know what's going to be the future of the models. This is Midjourney, the best software. Today you can create images at will. And I think that this is very poetic. These pictures are beautiful. I've selected just a few so that you could have fun. It's quite extraordinary. Maybe the cinema industry is going to be threatened. The incredible acceleration of IT capacity is not just alone. You have science fiction, that's science in advance. There are two things we won't be able to do. It's traveling in time and teletransportation, as in Star Trek. But the rest, we can do it right now. Reading the thoughts. On the top, pictures that we presented to guinea pigs, and at the bottom, the images that were reproduced, rebuilt by the computer with simple sensors of the brain activity. It is incredible. It's not a projection. This is what we're doing today. This is what we've managed to do today. You can see the teddy bear, you can see the church, you can see the skier, and you can even see that he's surfing, you can see the aircraft, etc. But it's going really fast, and this is Elon Musk's project to merge our brain with the computer. And the other extremely important point, which nourishes this exponential curve, is the viral behaviors that we have. We've never ever done things the same way when we could have done it differently because of our gregarious instinct. Look at the progress of technology that we've all been using since the 1900s. Telephone, electricity, cars, the social media, smartphone, tablets. We need 50 years to disseminate it in the population, and today it is disseminated with a vertical curve. It is going faster and faster, and there are a lot of things that we're going to use increasingly. The must-haves are being disseminated at top speed. I have another illustration. How many years we needed to have 50 million users for various products? Airlines, 52, TV, 22, Facebook, 3 years, Pokemon Go, a few days. So this works with other things too. So how much time do we need to have 1 million users? Netflix, 3.5 years, Airbnb 2.5 years, Facebook 10 months, Spotify 5 months, ChatGPT 5 days, and there are several hundreds of millions of people. So our world is more and more digitalized. An electric signal, it goes 7 times around the world in a few seconds, so it can serve the whole world when everything is electric at the same time. Roughly, there's a bit of a latency, but it can be very, very fast. And what's wonderful with science is that we can forecast what we're going to do. These are postcards written in 1900, and the postcard said this is going to be the world in the year 2000. The drawer tried to imagine what the world would be like in the year 2000, and you see he had forecasted what is going to happen. We would record ourselves, go faster, speak remotely, but what is it that we can't forecast, that we have trouble forecasting? That's the way in which the society is changing with these technologies. We have appropriated these technologies at the beginning of the phone. One of the first applications was theater on the phone. We thought, wonderful, we're going to be able to listen the opera and theater remotely, and I think Proust was subscribed to that. And then who could have believed that an album invented in Harvard would have as a consequence later on, an indirect consequence, but still, there's an important share, the occupation of the capital with the person who was bear with a bison mask on his head. So a lot of things are changing, and the effect of the social media on democracy is killing democracy, and we haven't found the solution amongst us. Well, the effect of this social media, this information disaster, we had not planned it. We welcomed it in 2000, saying it's great, we can write to each other, send pictures, etc. And that's the story of the 21st century, the history of learning brutal consequences on society, and more brutal because, unfortunately, things are going faster and faster, and the faster things are going, the less time we have to digest all this. And one of the characteristics of our time is that the level of demand, cognitive demand, is increasing greatly. And there's a sheer effect with the leisure, because the talent war has begun. All of you in your organizations, I'm sure you're aware of this. I don't see a single sector that doesn't say we cannot find the right talents. There isn't a single sector. Logistics, insurance, bank, health, everywhere. Where are they? So what was the wealth of the nations before the Industrial Revolution? It was the earth, because there wasn't a revolution in agricultural production. We needed a lot of land to feed people. 2 million people died under Louis XIV. They died because of famine. We died until the middle of the 20th century, until there was the agricultural revolution. So what was the wealth of the nations? It was land. You needed more land. And this is why you had these wars to conquer land. And afterwards, what was the wealth of the nation? It was mastering energy, raw material, of course, and the industrial capacity. And that is what we wanted to conquer afterwards, this industrial and technical capacity. And the 21st century, how can you measure the power of a nation? The brains. Today, the power, the economic and military power, comes from the countries that have the best innovations. Who has the best innovations? Those who have the best scientists, the best brains, the best trained brains. To the real global competition is around training and the attraction of the best talents, the best brains in the world. And we're not equal in this fight. The major problem of South Korea, what is it? Is to make their students work less. All the students in South Korea, they go to a second school after the first school. So to try to discourage them to go to a second school, the government has created classes online so that they won't go. And the connection peaks for these classes online is at 1 a.m. And then they force the second school to close down at 10 p.m. To close down at 10 p.m. so that the students can take some rest. So the schools created schools online, and the connection peak is at 1 a.m. South Korea cannot find a way to make their kids work less. France was not at the same level. We don't have the same stakes. You know that in China, the Chinese government bans more than 40 minutes of TikTok per day and more than 3 hours of video games per week for those under 18. And that is expressed very clearly. The brains of our children are our main assets. We have to protect them from this opium. It is no more religion which is the opium of the people. It is the video games, and this form of opium, we have to limit its use. And of course, for us, it's slightly different. In France, the degree of cognitive demand of our civilization is increasing. It is harder and harder to live, to be useful, and to understand this world in the 21st century, because we will have to be married to the machine. You know the famous sentence, you're not going to be replaced by AI, you're going to be replaced by someone who uses AI, which is very different. That's very different, because that someone who uses AI, it could be you. Maybe someday we'll be replaced, but right now we will be replaced by somebody who uses AI. One of my friends who's a tax expert, she says, I don't need any junior people. I can do my research in all the languages, produce a good document. I have enough skills, seniority to correct the mistakes, and I put my name. That's very good, isn't it? And I adapt. And in less time, I do something that has far more value than what I could have done for weeks. I don't need junior people. And that's a problem, because in an economy where we don't need junior people, how do you become a senior? And so today you shouldn't say too loud after the retirement pension reforms in France, but the seniors, they are at the top in our society, because when you have more expertise, you have the keys of the system, you have the keys of the truck, and you have the skills to properly use AI, which is going to replace the young trainees, first the and the others. So this is the first sheer effect, the increase of the cognitive demand. You have to be better trained. And the second sheer effect is this complex relationship we have with the leisure time. And that's the topic of my book, and I'll sign some of these books if we've been delivered these books.
So let's take a step back. We all started as hunter-gatherers 10,000 years ago. That's what we were. So we went off, 100 of us, every day, 20 kilometers a day. Kilometers squared was needed to feed these people in the day. One child every 4 years, and you would move around a lot. And did you work a lot in those days? Well, no. We're told they worked about 1 to 4 hours a day, really. So there wasn't 2 days that were intense. You worked a little bit, you slept a lot, you talked. And what did you do for the rest of the time? Well, absolutely nothing. You talked, you showed what your face painting. If you read Levi-Strauss, sad tropicals, then you'll know. Now, I think it's Levi-Strauss actually that says this as well. In the day, you weren't an individual, you were a person. In other words, you were a member of a group, and you didn't exist outside of that group. But today, when you say entertainment, you think time for yourself, time in which you can do what you like, by being cut off from the rest of the world. So actually, what happened then? From the Neolithic period, when society becomes sedentary, where you started to farm, etc., etc. Now, that was kind of a pact with the devil. It was a bad deal, really. It goes back to Goethe, doesn't he? Mephistopheles. You get eternal youth by signing a contract with the devil. So, okay, since we've had farming, we've never died so much of hunger. Why? Well, because, you've got more opportunity to have more children. You don't have one every 4 years, you have one every 2 years, let's say. And then farming, well, you need manpower. It's a lot of work. So you need lots of children, which means you've got more mouths to feed, which means you have to farm more and more. So, demographically, things exploded, but we started dying of hunger. So this is the long march to the reconquering of original entertainment, if you will, because originally we didn't do anything, really. And then 10,000 years ago, we started working like crazy, because that's what it was about. Inequalities appeared, property, people in the population worked all their life. And then 19th century, we hit the bottom. 4,000 hours a year was the time that people worked. And life was short, you didn't sleep much. In 1945, 65 years for retirement, but 55 was the average life expectancy for a labourer. You weren't expected to survive to retirement. And these days, when you go in retirement, it's about 22 to 26 years of retirement you're going to enjoy. So in those days, 19th century, people worked a lot, and then you started retrieving leisure and pleasure, which is our original vocation, because, when I pitched in Twitter my book, I had death threats, because people thought that I was saying that you had to work more. And not at all. In fact, quite the contrary. Our vocation is to enjoy ourselves. It depends what entertainment you're looking for. What I'm getting at is that really entertainment is more difficult, if you will, or leisure is more difficult than work. In 1950, working time diminishes considerably. It's more marked in France than elsewhere, but it's basically what happened. And France is really good for this, by the way. Anyway, in 1900, you worked, 1,500 hours. That fell 1,000 to 1,600 or so. And then life expectancy, of course, went up hugely, which means that today, if you do 35-hour week and you have all your points for your retirement, you're going to work only 12% of your life without sleeping. Today, it's an ocean of entertainment where you're going to have 1 or 2 not slots of work where you're going to go dragging your feet, unless you enjoy your work, of course. I'm sure that people in this room work more than 35 hours a week, but anyway, it's the actual fact then. We've entered into a world which is turned on its axis differently, the mindset, if you like, of the day. In some developed areas of the world, of course, is that really life is to be lived to be enjoyed, not to suffer. You want to enjoy yourself. It's to have leisure and entertainment. And so from time to time, of course, you have to fit work in, but it's not necessarily a happy time working. So what do we do with entertainment? Well, there are three things that you do for time for yourself. First, you entertain yourself is passive, if you will, where you forget yourself, where you don't improve yourself, if you will, but makes you less who you are. You lose yourself. Know thyself, for example. It's the idea basically of becoming wise and knowing yourself more, working on yourself. That's what wisdom was in the ancient world. But entertainment is quite the opposite. And then the aristocratic pleasure, because this is the purview of the aristocrats, interacting with other people. It's when you're with your mates, with your family. It's the social time, if you will, is always useful because we're political animals, as Aristotle said. And then third, pleasure and leisure, if you will, is study time, developing yourself, better knowing yourself. I mean, skole, for example, is the Greek word for study, when you were rich enough not to have to work. Sport as well. Possibly getting bored as well, because boredom is very fruitful. And this is what you're going to do, isn't it, when you're doing artistic activity and what have you. And there's travel as well. I'll get to that in a moment. But the problem is that these three forms of entertainment, of course, we need times when you just do nothing, you're passive. You're on your sofa switching channels. The problem is the tyranny of entertainment, where it's going to eat up the other forms of leisure and pleasure, and they stop them developing. And I think we're seeing kind of a triumph of entertainment. In the 18th century, what was important? Well, it was to be closest to God as possible. That was the only thing that was important. Our life was pretty awful, wasn't it, in those days? And then maybe later on, 19th century, it was the nation. And I'm ready to die at 20 in the trenches to do that. But I mean, I would imagine if we ask the same question to young people, I think you might be surprised what they say. And then after the 30-year boom period after the Second World War, it was this. Jean Ferrat, for example, in his song talked about the mountain, Formica and what have you, that was dreamed of. In the 1950s, it was discovering a new mode of life for many, many people. In other words, comfort. And people aren't ready to turn their back on that. The mindset has changed. In 1992, it was a turning point. It was the year where the Renault factories closed in Billancourt. And 2 days later, what do we see? Disney opens its doors. So the switch from an industrial society to a society based on entertainment. I'm picking up speed because I've only got 90 seconds. I've got stacks of things to say. I'll try and keep to time. Anyway, the problem today is boredom, isn't it? Paradoxically, we never had so much free time. But, what do you do with that time? It's very tricky. The famous economist, he saw this. He said in the 1930s, he thought that an entertainment society would emerge. And he was frightened because he knew that technologically we're going to be able to work much less. But he thought that would be awful. A society where you don't have to work, because leisure and pleasure is something which is even more difficult than work to think about. Look, overdoses in the United States, the death toll in the US. Look at this then. Look at mental problems with girls and women in the United States between 2001 and 2018. Something's happened, isn't it? So what happened? Well, around 2012, this, became widespread. There you are. In a nutshell. I haven't got time to expand on that. There's so much to say. Anyway, let's have a look at this now. Young people have less sex and see their friends much more. Takes a big chunk of night time, doesn't it? So we've got lots of time, but we do much less as a group. Wall Street Journal, there was an article appeared a few months back saying that 7 million Americans exited the workplace during COVID. So what are they doing? Do they get involved in not-for-profits? Do they do for society? The answer in the article was no. They play Call of Duty. 2,000 hours a year. How much time equivalent to what they spent at their desk when they were working previously. It's a problem, of course. It boils down to addiction. Between a difference between a neurotransmitter of happiness and pleasure. Dopamine, for example. We have a sugar lump. You know, when you're a hunter-gatherer, you didn't have much of that, did you? Because it was in the honey. And then, on average, an American, how many kilos of refined sugar does he eat per year? 70 kilos. So, you know, the sugar industry has hacked our brain because it's so powerful and picks up on this idea of a reward response. This is what happens with these apps. They've looked into this scientifically, and they created sensors, if you will, to pick up on our behavior. 20 years back, if you were to look at your email 64, or your letterbox 64 times a day, you'd be locked up. But we do that now, electronically. And we look at texts as 200 meters of the damn thing. And the selfies, homophobia, being frightened of being disconnected from your mobile phone, fear of being disconnected from what's going on. Unfortunately, we don't have Wi-Fi in this room. So we're becoming increasingly addictive to things. In 1947, the creator of 20th Century Fox said, man will get tired of looking at a little wooden box, in other words, the TV every evening. 3.5 hours a day for a French person. Then you add 4 hours on a screen. I mean, it depends on people, but 60 or 70% of our time is spent on screens. Time, if you will, that was freed up, that was gained on necessity. After 10,000 years of technology, what do we do most times? Well, we don't do very much, to be honest. Maybe tomorrow, Matrix has got it wrong. People will be deliberately hooked up to the Matrix. They won't be forced to do so because our life will be pretty shitty compared with the life that you can live online, which will be infinite, because what a real day is, you don't have control of the weather. It rains one day, it snows the next, and your heart doesn't race until you are on a drip, constant entertainment drip. A teenager room. Your room isn't like this, but anyway, these are children in Japan, young adults that can't get out of their room and interact with real people, because doing that is risky, they say. All right, let me finish off then with tourism, obviously, because this is the solution, but also part of the problem. It's this part of the solution, well, because it brings you out of your house, doesn't it? You go somewhere else. A trip, I like this, the meaning of the visit. It's a fabulous Google Translate, isn't it? It's a fabulous translation, isn't it? Just look at it, because basically, maybe it captures the whole matter here. The meaning of the visit. Anyway, increasingly, travels abroad, it's not to go and see something, but to prove that you've seen something without actually having seen something. Look, they haven't even seen the pyramids. It's the telephone that's seen it for you. It's also a time when you might feel that well, this is the Ramblas in Barcelona. There's so many of you that you can end up spoiling what you're actually visiting. And it won't exist anymore. Just like Lascaux caves, they had to be closed because the more visitors there came, the more things would disappear on the rock face. Same thing with Venice. So the main problem for tourism is mass tourism. That has to pick up on the legitimate desire of people to go off and satisfy their curiosity. But there's a attendant risk of destroying what you're seeing. In the past, you travel to explore, possibly for war. Obviously, that's a good reason, I suppose, to discover things as well, look, to trade. And then from the 17th century, when tourism emerged, you went off to discover other civilizations and become intellectually wealthier. Tourism was developed by the English. Le Grand Tour in the 18th century, English aristocrats would go around Europe for a while. It could span a number of years to open their minds to other civilizations. And it was that meaningfulness of original tourism that has to be today. It was elitist in those days because it's a tiny minority of the population that did that. People talk about revolutions, but revolutions means going back to your starting point. So we don't want a revolution. We need to spiral. The point of a trip is not to bring back to where you were, like Ulysses, who comes back to Penelope. And look at a spiral. You come back to your starting point, but with bigger concentric circles, if you will. That's the idea. You don't want to come back to where you were. Look at Velázquez. This painting is a memento mori, isn't it? Well, it's an interpretation here. But anyway, it's a painting that's telling you what? It's saying, look, behind the illusion of what's important, in other words, the painting the king and the queen that Velázquez was asked to paint, I didn't do that, he says. I did the reverse. This is what the king and the queen are seeing while they're taking their pose for me as a painter. So he turned things on his head and showed princesses that are bored stiff and a dog and the jokers in the court, if you will, to entertain people who are posing, because the princess is bored, because, it takes a while, doesn't it, standing for being painted. And what does Velázquez say here? He says, look, the truth of life is in those moments, in those daily humdrum bread and butter moments, if you like, that you can't see them necessarily as important, but it's not an equivalent to this grandiloquent painting. Now look at this test here. You put a child in front of a marshmallow. You say, look, I'll go out of the room and you're not allowed to eat it. A researcher did this and tracked a child over a 30-year period. The diagnosis is amazing. The children that waited and didn't eat their marshmallow are doing much better than those who gobble it up. If you've procrastinated, if you capitalized and pushed back your ultimate pleasure, then you reach pleasure more surely than somebody who doesn't. Anyway, look, here are the three little pigs. The immediate pleasure for one of these pigs was to have that sugar lump, but he wanted immediate pleasure, but he gets gobbled up, doesn't he, by the wolf. But the chap who puts together a brick house, he sweated his brow, didn't he? He took time, necessary time to master the bricks and mortar. It's also true for music, particularly for people learning the violin. But as time goes by, you have specific honed pleasure. Eric Satie said this. He said that piano is like chess. It's only those who enjoy chess and good at chess that enjoy chess. Same thing for violin. So, which obviously means that you need to sweat your brow. So what are the three pillars for leisure and pleasure in tourism, in the hotel industry in the 21st century? Motivate and emotion, they have the same etymological root, if you will. It's what makes us move, makes us different. The path is more important, the journey is more important than the destination. To be dynamic, to be in flux, and possibly leave yourself, if you will, to better know what's going on outside. Foucault said, what's great about work is that it makes you different to what you were. What's crucial about journeying is that you don't come back the same. You come back to where you were, but different. Second pillar is shedding light. Meaningfulness, if you will. We need, when you go somewhere, you need to get to a transcendent meaning often, where you can understand a world which is becoming increasingly complex. The why is something that is more important. The question, and then building links. You need to build links. Why? Well, because we're increasingly lonely, paradoxically, in this world, because we're hyper-connected, but hyper alone. So the place that you are shouldn't be something that's independent of the world. It should be a location where you have roots that are linked to where you are. When you're traveling in the past, when you're an aristocrat doing the grand tour, you didn't stay with your own customs, if you will. You went to discover other people's customs. And I believe very deeply that the three luxuries of the 21st century boil down to this. And the hotel industry opens the door to this time. Time, because what you realize is you've got more and more time. And yet, we run after time much more. Mastering your time and have enough time. Tourism develops in this field, doesn't it? The time, if you will, just to stop time. And that becomes increasingly important, and we can sense that greater need for that space in these big cities which space is a rare commodity. And then roots, this idea of being connected, the idea that you're not in a particular place which is the same as anywhere else. No, you're in a particular place which should prompt an exchange and interaction with where you are. Woody Allen said, I like the future. That's where I want to live the rest of my life. And I think in the hotel industry more than anywhere else, I think we can, despite this exponentiality that I've talked about, you can love the future if you take hold of it, if you grasp the nettle in a resolute and determined fashion. Thanks very much.